Hello movie Barfs, and welcome back to the channel. I guess it's a bit of a surprise that Cruella's reception has been better than average, to say the least. After a string of mediocre live-action remakes/retellings, we kinda expected that the film would be the latest member in a forgettable lineup of disappointments. But I actually think it's not that bad, to be honest. It's definitely no Joker, but at the same time, it's not the worst Disney retelling we've had. I know I'm probably supposed to hate this film being another prequel and all, but I think it's still somewhat fun, and at least it's not Maleficent. It was unusually dark for a Disney movie, and I was surprised by some of the more mature themes they chose to explore. It was still entertaining at some points, albeit with some flaws here and there. And speaking of flaws, right from the beginning, it didn't really have a strong start, as we discover that the persona of Cruella just happens to be the result of some split personality disorder that our main character Estella has to keep under control. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde, Banner and Hulk situation, where Estella has to suppress that side of her personality from coming out, or bad things will happen. So right from the get-go, I felt it was a weak way to explain the character of Cruella. Chalking her up to just being a personality disorder felt convenient and a cheap replacement to actually developing her character throughout the duration of the movie. But oh well, I just accepted the premise and moved on. Later on, Estella has befriended Jasper and Horace and is living life on the streets, and quite prosperously too, if I may say so. But then as a birthday gift, she gets a job offer from Jasper as a present to work at one of the high-end fashion stores. Okay, great. Looks like the plot is advancing, and this must be her entry into the fashion world, something that she's been dreaming about. Well, as it turns out, that job is just a crap position where she's basically a cleaner, doing all the dirty work for the store. And I find this to be an inconsistency with Estella's character. It's hardly believable that a character like Estella would be able to accept such a crappy job. From the start, even at a young age, we clearly see that Estella is the sort of person who takes no nonsense from anyone. We saw this when at school, when she gets insulted or ridiculed, she proceeds to give her bullies a good old beating in the name of "hear me roar." She gets into so much trouble that she even gets expelled out of school. And later on, she lives the high life of helping herself to whatever she fancies, living the life of a street thief with Jasper and Horace. So it seems very unlikely indeed that she would go from that luxurious lifestyle to just doing menial tasks as a cleaner, combined with all the ridicule and mockery that her douche manager throws at her. The Estella that we've been introduced to, and the Estella that we're familiar with, wouldn't stand for this kind of treatment at all. I mean, did none of all that ridicule trigger Cruella into coming out and just wreck the place? I would have expected her to rage quit on her first day and find some other way into the fashion world. And speaking of her entrance into the fashion world, boy was it such a weak justification. She gets drunk while setting up the store display one night and ends up making a huge mess out of it. The next morning, the Baroness comes knocking and demands to know the culprit for the mess. We'd be expecting Estella to be fired at this point, but the film subverts our expectations by having the Baroness be impressed with that atrocity and hire her instead. That was a huge eye-rolling moment, honestly. There's no way we'd expect that she would be impressed by that mess. It's just a bunch of crumpled newspapers with kindergarten-like graffiti. It looks like the result of what happens when you give a bunch of children free rein with a bunch of crayons and a clean wall. It was silly and so very unbelievable and felt like a cheap way to surprise the audience while pushing along the plot. But anyway, so Estrella is now working for the Baroness, and this leads me to another point about the film. Honestly, this can be seen as either a positive or a negative, so I'll let you decide on this. But the Baroness, my goodness, was she just annoying as heck or what? I mean, there's no nice way to say it, but she is an absolute female canine. She just treats everyone around her like crap, and boy does it get irritating real fast. She is one of the most hateable antagonists you've seen in a while, and I have to give credit to the writers and Emma Thompson for bringing such a character to life. To be honest, I kinda feel conflicted on this one. On one hand, her character was irritating, unrealistic, and very one-dimensional. She doesn't have any character development, and we as the audience don't ever know why she's in the state she is. There's absolutely nothing redeemable about her character, no shred of goodness in her at all. But at the same time, she was so hateable that you can't wait to see her get her comeuppance. You get invested into the story because you want to see her get what's coming to her. As we progress further into the film, we get two plot twists. The first of which is that the Baroness actually killed Estella's mum. Okay, good, I actually like this plot twist since it poured fuel on the fire that was already lit when Estella saw the necklace on the Baroness. But what I didn't appreciate was the sudden change that Estella undergoes. Basically, Cruella comes out and takes over Estella in an instant, like that cliché psychology phenomenon we see in movies where some psychiatrist snaps their fingers and the person becomes a totally different person just like that. Well, that pretty much happens here, and it feels rushed. It feels very unnatural and underdeveloped. She just becomes a totally different person due to this revelation, and it disrupts the flow of the character. What was the point of presenting Estella as the common everyday girl that we can relate to when she's just going to be written away in an instant? I found myself wishing that Estella would return just like Jasper and Horace did. And just like how the two of them felt, Cruella was such an unlikable protagonist. I mean, were any of you rooting for her after you saw the way she behaved? In fact, we're probably rooting for her not to become Cruella instead. She was like a mini Baroness, which we'll get to later, and I was rather turned off by her attitude and how she mistreated her childhood friends. That's not how realistic character development happens. It's not natural to go from this to this in just one night. It's a character change as abrupt and unjustified as Eli's transformation to Hawk in the Cobra Kai series. But anyway, remember how I said that the Baroness being unlikable was a good thing? Well, that comes into play here. Cruella was unlikable and it made rooting for her almost impossible. But the Baroness, she was still the main female canine, and if you forced me into making a choice, I'd have to choose Cruella over her because she still takes the cake in terms of unlikability. It's kind of like in the reality TV series Survivor, where the players vote for the person they hate the least because they have to vote. I guess that's why the Baroness was made to be so hateable, so that Cruella would appear to look better in comparison to her. And by the way, it takes some suspension of disbelief to accept that the Baroness somehow can't recognize Estella when all she has is that Robin/Green Lantern mask covering her face. But I guess it's somewhat acceptable given that Estella and Cruella's personalities are so drastically different. Estella is basically her Clark Kent persona to hide the other side that is Cruella. The second plot twist was the revelation that Estella is actually the Baroness's unwanted daughter. And it did present some interesting implications in the form of messing with Cruella's psyche when she realizes that she's the daughter of the woman she detests so much. I honestly did not see this twist coming, and as cliché and overused as it is, I was still pleasantly surprised. Not to mention, the notion of being rejected by her mother at birth could add to her list of resentments too. That could really mess her up emotionally on so many levels. It could have been a point of character development for Estella, but the thing is, she's already full-on evil here with the persona of Cruella. There's not much room for development left when her character is already at the end of the road for growth. I feel the main reason she was revealed to be her daughter was just so that she could inherit the Baroness's estate and fashion empire at the end. And also to give her an unexpected ally in the form of the butler, played by Mark Strong. I'd say his character was the only saving grace for masculinity in this film. He has hands down the best written line in the film. You know the one when the Baroness asks him if she pays him for his opinion or his obedience? He coyly responds with, "Are you asking my opinion on this?" Ultimately, Cruella is a revenge story, and that was one of the more enjoyable aspects of the film. The banter between the Baroness and Cruella was still fun to watch, and I was more invested into the plot than I thought I would be, simply because the Baroness was the antagonist we all love to hate, and could not wait for her to get what she deserved. It was satisfying to see her get arrested because prison would be torture for her pampered rear, and using the death of Estrella to frame her wasn't a bad idea. It's debatable as to whether the revelation of the Baroness being her mother caused Cruella to not kill her, but get her arrested instead. The main draw of this film, hands down, has to be its requirement to tie this version of Cruella to the original animated character. I mean, they tie it all the way to the start of the original animated movie, just like how the Hobbit films brought us all the way to the start of Fellowship of the Ring. But my issue is, and I'm sure some of you might feel this way too, this Cruella doesn't seem anything like the Cruella we got in the animated series. Emma Stone is great as an actress, but she doesn't resemble anything like her illustrated counterpart. She doesn't have the same screen presence that the original or even Glenn Close did. When they walked into a room, the atmosphere tenses up, and you get overwhelmed with a feeling of uneasiness. Not so much with Emma Stone. I see her as more of a young woman with a gothic dress sense, instead of a sadistic middle-aged woman out to murder puppies. I also found it rushed when they set up her last name as DeVille. I mean, she just gets it from the brand of a car? What's up with that? That's about as convenient as how Han Solo got his name just because he was alone at the time. Why couldn't her name just be DeVille from the start? Or maybe have her choose it as an alias or something, just not a car brand that she happens to see right before the climax of the film. Overall, Cruella was somewhat entertaining at times, but the main things that didn't work for me were the convenient and underdeveloped split personality of Cruella and the need to tie it to the original. The film would have been better if it were free to be just a revenge story about a girl taking on the head of a fashion empire, instead of having the obligation to be linked to the original animated movie. And that revenge story, coupled with the rivalry between the Baroness and Cruella, was one of the more entertaining aspects of the movie. It also did an excellent job in making a very unlikable character with the Baroness, that it kept me invested to see Cruella get the better of her time and time again. Even if you're a Disney fan scarred by all the remakes and retellings, I'd say this film is definitely worth a watch, and you probably won't regret it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.